Hey loves, Paula here with the Healed Love Languages. I am your nurse, your health coach, and your truth-telling big sister. I want you to grab your water, your coffee, your tea, whatever it is that you're drinking today. Please relax, unlock that jaw, and let's heal. Welcome back to the Healed Love Languages. Today and every day, we are stopping chasing chemistry and starting to choose character. Over the past 2 weeks, we've been building something together. In episode 1 of season 2, we learned that behavior is the most honest language we speak through behavioral intelligence, patterns, not words, not promises, not potential, but behavior. And last week, we talked about how character leaves clues, especially during those first 30 days of getting to know someone. We learned to watch how people respond to boundaries, correction, inconvenience, and accountability. But today, I want to answer the question that naturally follows. If behavior tells the truth and character leaves clues, why do smart people still ignore red flags? Why do intelligent, successful, kind, emotionally aware people still end up saying, I should have seen it, the signs were there, my friends knew, my family knew, why didn't I? And the answer probably isn't what you think. It isn't because you're weak or because you're desperate. And it certainly isn't because you're stupid. It is because your childhood may have taught your nervous system to edit the evidence. Think about that for a second. The behavior was real. The pattern was real. The inconsistency was real. But the story your nervous system told you about that behavior wasn't. Behavior didn't fool you. Your interpretation did. And your interpretation was often written long before you ever met that person. And today we're going to talk about something I believe changes everything. Behavioral intelligence isn't just learning to read other people's behavior. It is learning to recognize the filters through which you read it. Because healing doesn't just change who you choose. It changes what you notice. Your brain isn't looking for healthy because of those childhood wounds. I want to introduce you to this simple idea that your brain has one primary job. Surprisingly, it isn't happiness, it isn't romance, it isn't helping you find your soulmate. Your brain is trying to keep you alive every second of every day. If you're familiar with homeostasis, it is your body trying to keep you alive, to return everything back to normal. So your nervous system is scanning your environment, not asking, is this healthy? But asking, have I survived something like this before? And that is so important because surviving something and thriving in something are not the same thing. If you grew up in a home where love was inconsistent, your nervous system may mistake inconsistency for familiarity. And if you grew up walking on eggshells, not sure when somebody was going to smack you, chase you down, judge you, criticize you, calm may actually feel uncomfortable if affection was earned instead of freely given. Good grades, great behavior. If you only did what they said, if you kept your mouth shut, if affection was earned instead of freely given, you may naturally feel drawn toward people who make you work for their attention, not because that's healthy, but because it is familiar, and familiarity to your body and your brain feels safe. That's why people often say, I don't know why I'm attracted to emotionally unavailable people. You're not actually attracted to those people. It's just what feels familiar. Your conscious mind isn't choosing them. Your nervous system is recognizing the pattern and it's saying, I have been here before. I know how this works. And that is what you're wanting to do, is kind of control the outcome. You know how to survive it, but surviving isn't the same as being loved. One of the biggest lies trauma tells us is this: if it feels familiar, it must be right. And that is not absolutely true all the time. Sometimes familiar is simply familiar, not healthy. Behavior can be objective and stories are also personal. Here's something that changed the way I see relationships forever. Behavior. It's objective. Interpretation is personal. And let's look at a few examples. Behavior. He canceled dinner 3 times. That's a fact. Now listen to the stories. Story number 1 could be that you think up, well, he's probably just overwhelmed. Or story number 2, he must be really busy. Or number 3 could be, maybe I expected too much. Same behavior, 3 different interpretations. Or how about this one? She never apologizes after an argument. Fact, now the stories begin. What excuses are you going to give? She just isn't good at expressing emotions, or she had a difficult childhood, or she's afraid of vulnerability. Maybe all those things are true, but none of them change the behavior. One of the greatest mistakes we make is replacing observation with explanation. And we assume that we are correct in that explanation. We become detectives for someone else's intentions instead of just witnesses to their actions. Believe in them in showing us who they are. We spend so much energy trying to understand why they did something that we will tear it apart, ask friends, we'll do all these things to try to understand it, that we stop asking whether the paper itself is acceptable and something that we are actually comfortable with and can live with long term. Behavioral intelligence asks a radically different question, not why do you think they did that, but what actually happened, because facts protect you. Stories can trap you. Another example would be someone repeatedly interrupts you every time you speak. The fact is simple. They interrupted you, but your story might become they're just passionate or they're excited. They don't realize they're doing it. Maybe, or maybe they simply don't value listening. And listening is very important in a relationship. The point isn't to assume the worst. The point is to stop inventing explanations that allow you to ignore reality while looking at or prioritizing potential. One of the healthiest questions you'll ever ask yourself is this: am I responding to what actually happened, or to the story I've created about what happened? That question alone has the power to change every relationship you'll ever have. We're going to get into the 5 childhood wounds that quietly edit the evidence. And I want to be very clear here. This isn't about blaming your parents. Most parents did the best they could with what they knew. Some did an incredible job. Some were very nasty. So you have to separate yourself from that. Some of them also caused deep wounds. The goal isn't blame. The goal is awareness so that you can make better decisions, educated decisions about your relationships, because you can't heal what you refuse to acknowledge. Let's look at the 5 common childhood wounds that quietly change how we interpret other people's behavior. Number 1, emotional neglect. This isn't always abuse. Sometimes it's simply growing up in a home where your emotional needs weren't noticed. Maybe no one asked how you felt. Or maybe you learned very quickly that crying made people uncomfortable. Maybe your feelings were met with, you're too sensitive, or you'll be fine. Stop being a titty baby. Stop crying. It's not that big of a deal. And over time, you stop expecting your emotional needs to matter. So someone you're dating doesn't ask how you're doing or about your day, doesn't check in, doesn't notice you're hurting. You don't immediately think, I'm not emotionally safe here. Instead, you come up with excuses. I'm asking for too much. No, you're not. You learn to expect too little, and there's a difference. Ask, what behavior am I accepting because it feels familiar? Number 2, the wound of rejection. If love felt conditional growing up, you may have learned that being chosen had to be earned. You had to make good grades. You have to behave exactly the way they want you to. You have to keep your mouth shut. Maybe you were praised only when you performed, only when you achieved, only when you made everyone else happy. So now someone pulls away, and instead of letting them, you chase harder. You become more understanding, more patient, more available, more forgiving. You think, if I just love them well enough, or if I can just prove my worth, maybe this time someone will finally stay. Can I tell you something that changed my life? Love that has to be earned isn't healthy love. I'm going to repeat it for those in the back. Love that has to be earned isn't healthy love. Healthy love isn't built on convincing someone to choose you. It is built on 2 emotionally healthy people choosing each other every single day. Number 3, the wound of constant criticism. If you grew up constantly being corrected, compared, judged, or made to feel like nothing you did was ever enough, you began assuming you're the problem. Someone lies to you. You wonder what you did wrong. Someone cheats. You wonder if you weren't enough. Someone becomes emotionally unavailable. You immediately begin improving yourself, reading another book, listening to another podcast, working on yourself again. Now, don't misunderstand me. Personal growth is wonderful. It's amazing. You'll be so happy that you did it. I'm a huge believer in healing, but healing becomes unhealthy when you make yourself responsible for someone else's behavior. Behavioral intelligence tells us this: someone else's choices belong to them, not to you. Stop carrying responsibility for behavior you didn't create. Number 4, the wound of chaos. This one is incredibly common. Maybe home never felt predictable. Some days everyone laughed together. Other days you were walking on eggshells. Maybe there was an addiction, a lot of anger, silent treatments, emotional outbursts. Maybe there was a combination of all of those. You never knew which version of someone was coming through the front door. So your nervous system adapted. It became hypervigilant, always scanning, always preparing, always waiting for the next emotional storm. And then one day you meet someone steady, consistent, emotionally available, and instead of feeling excited, you feel nothing. You think they're nice, but there's just no chemistry. Maybe there isn't chemistry. Maybe there's no cortisol. Maybe for the first time in your life, your nervous system isn't confusing anxiety with attraction. Healthy love doesn't always feel exciting at first. Sometimes it just feels peaceful. And if peaceful is unfamiliar, your nervous system may mistakenly call it boring. Number 5, this one breaks my heart. Some of you weren't allowed to be children. You became the counselor, the peacemaker, the emotional support system. You buried burdens that never belonged on your shoulders. So now, as an adult, you naturally become attracted to people who need saving, not because they're healthy, but because your identity became wrapped up in helping. You became everyone's therapist. You excuse bad behavior because you understand their trauma. You convince yourself that if you love them long enough, patiently enough, selflessly enough, you'll finally heal them. But here's the truth: healing is an inside job. You cannot heal someone who refuses to participate in their own healing. And here's another hard truth: some people don't need another therapist, they need consequences. Compassion and accountability are not enemies, they belong together. Did you notice something here? None of these wounds change the other person's behavior. They change how you interpreted it. And there's the key: behavior stayed the same, the lens changed. And once you understand that, everything starts to make sense, because healing isn't about becoming suspicious of everyone. It's about removing the filters that kept you from seeing clearly. I want to give you a tool today, not just another idea, an actual tool, because awareness without application doesn't change your life. So anytime you're confused in a relationship, I want you to remember 3 words: behavior, interpretation, and decision. Let's walk through it. First, behavior. Ask yourself what actually happened, not what I think happened, not what I hope happened, and not what they probably meant, just what happened. And stick to the facts. Let's use an example. They said they would call, they didn't. That's the behavior. Simple, objective, observable. Now comes the dangerous part: interpretation. Immediately your brain starts filling in the blanks. They're overwhelmed. They're busy. They're afraid of intimacy. They just had a hard week. Maybe, but notice you don't actually know any of that. You're writing the story. Then comes the third step: decision. Because you believe the story, you decided to stay. Wait longer, lower your standards, ignore the pattern, make another excuse. Then behavior didn't make the decision. The story did. Now let's reverse it. Behavior: they consistently follow through. Interpretation: they're reliable. Decision: you begin trusting them. Healthy behavior, healthy interpretation, healthy decision. Behavioral intelligence is learning to interrupt that middle step. Instead of asking, what do I think they meant? Ask, what evidence do I actually have? And that question alone can save you years of heartache. Stop being the authority to someone else's story. Can I lovingly challenge something? Some of us have become incredible storytellers, not because we're creative, but because we're hopeful. We finish people's sentences. We explain their behavior. We defend them before they've even apologized. We become the narrator of someone else's life. He didn't mean it. She's just overwhelmed. They've been hurt. I know they're hurt. Maybe all of that's true, but here's the question: is their behavior changing? Because understanding someone isn't the same as trusting them. Empathy is beautiful. Empathy without discernment can become self-abandonment. Some of the kindest people I know stay in unhealthy relationships, not because they don't see the behavior, but because they keep rewriting it into something easier to tolerate. Have you ever caught yourself saying, well, they had a difficult childhood? Well, me too. And here's the truth: understanding someone's pain can explain their behavior. It should never excuse ongoing harm. You can have compassion for someone's wounds without volunteering to become another casualty for them. Healing doesn't just change who you date, it changes what you notice. One of the most beautiful things about healing is that your definition of attraction begins to change. Before healing, you notice confidence. After healing, you notice humility. Before healing, you notice excitement. After healing, you notice consistency. Before healing, you were attracted to intensity. After healing, you appreciate the peace. Before healing, you admire potential. After healing, you value character. The person didn't change, your lens did. And that's why healing is so powerful, because eventually your nervous system stops chasing what feels familiar and starts appreciating what feels safe. Not because someone told you to, but because you've become healthy enough to recognize it. One day you'll meet someone who texts when they say they're going to, apologize without being forced, who respects your boundaries, who communicates instead of disappearing, who keeps their word. And instead of thinking they're boring, you're going to think they're trustworthy. And that is healing. So let's close this up. How do we know if we're actually seeing people clearly? And Jesus answered that question long before psychology did. And let's talk about that. He told us to recognize their fruit. And I've talked about this in the last few episodes. But as we walk through this episode, you might be thinking, isn't that being judgmental? And that's an important question. Because as Christians, we're called to love people, to forgive people, to show grace. Absolutely. But sometimes we've confused grace with ignoring reality. Jesus never asked us to pretend behavior doesn't matter. In fact, he taught the opposite. In Matthew 7:16, he said, you will recognize them by their fruit. Just think about that. Jesus didn't say you'll recognize them by their intentions. He didn't say you'll recognize them by their potential, or you'll recognize them by how convincing they sound. He said by their truth. Fruit is observable. Fruit is consistent. Fruit develops over time. Discernment isn't judging someone's value. It's observing whether their life consistently produces healthy fruit. That's wisdom, and wisdom is biblical. As a reminder, Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Notice scripture doesn't say give everyone unlimited access to your heart. It says guard it, not with flex, but with wisdom. Because guarding your heart isn't about building walls. It's about having gates. And gates require discernment. Not everyone who knocks should be invited in. And I want to leave you with this. Maybe your greatest relationship problem was never that you couldn't recognize unhealthy behavior. Maybe it was that your childhood taught you to explain it, to normalize it, to minimize it, to take responsibility for it and to hope it would change. But healing changes something profound. Healing doesn't just give you your better boundaries, it gives you a better lens. You stop recreating behavior into something easier to tolerate, or you stop confusing empathy with obligation. You stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And slowly, something beautiful happens. You stop asking, why do I keep attracting unhealthy people? Because you realize you weren't attracting them any more than anyone else. You were simply interpreting their behavior differently, but not anymore. Now you have the power to choose differently because you've become healthy. Your childhood may have taught you how to survive. Healing teaches you how to see. And when you finally see clearly, you stop choosing familiar pain and start choosing healthy love. I do have a challenge I want you to take with you this week. Each episode is going to have a behavioral intelligence challenge. Please try this. Think about one relationship, past or present. Draw a line down the middle of a page. On the left, write facts. Only write what actually happened. Observable behavior, no opinions, no explanations, no assumptions. On the right, write stories. Write every explanation you created. They weren't busy. They were scared. They had a hard childhood. They didn't mean it. Then compare the two columns. You may discover something that changes the way you see relationships forever, because healing often begins the moment we stop arguing with the facts. Thank you for spending time with me. I am honored to be a part of your healing. If this episode challenged you, encouraged you, or gave you language for something you've experienced, please leave me a review, rate my show, and then do me a bigger favor. Share it with someone who needs it. It helps more people discover the podcast and join us on this journey toward healthier relationships. Until next time, remember, heal, choose better, and love better. Have a great day. Bye, loves.